I was rushing through the doors of Taco Libre in Austin, Texas at 7:43 on a Friday night, still wearing my hospital scrubs, and having a full-blown internal debate about whether I should just turn around and go home. Showing up to a first date 45 minutes late, still in my hospital scrubs, was probably the worst impression I could possibly make. My phone had been buzzing non-stop with apologetic texts I'd been sending to Dylan, the guy I was supposed to meet at 7 o'clock.
I'd already typed out 3 different versions of, "I'm so sorry, but I need to reschedule," before deleting each one, because this was the 3rd time in 2 months I'd canceled plans last minute. My coworker, Jenna, who'd set this whole thing up, had specifically told me, "If you bail on this one, I'm never setting you up again. Dylan's a good guy, and you need to at least give him a chance."
The problem was, I'd been about to leave the hospital at 6:30 when a trauma came in, a motorcycle accident with multiple injuries. As an ER nurse, I couldn't exactly walk out in the middle of someone's life or death situation just because I had dinner plans. I'd scrubbed out at 7:30, checked my phone to find 2 texts from Dylan saying, "No worries, take your time and I'll grab us a table."
I'd made the split-second decision to just go straight there instead of driving home to change, because by the time I got to my apartment and showered and put on real clothes, it would be past 8:30. That felt even worse than showing up looking like I just walked off a 12-hour shift, which, technically, I had. My scrubs were wrinkled and had a coffee stain on the sleeve from this morning. My hair was falling out of the bun I'd thrown it in at the start of my shift, and I was pretty sure I still smelled like antiseptic in hospital cafeteria. But I forced myself forward before I could talk myself into leaving. I immediately spotted Dylan sitting at a booth near the window. I knew it was him because Jenna had shown me exactly one photo and told me. "He's got dark hair, blue eyes, works with his hands, so he'll probably be in jeans and a work shirt. Super down to earth."
"You like him?" He was scrolling through his phone and had a half-empty beer in front of him, and my stomach twisted with guilt because this poor guy had been sitting here alone for almost an hour, waiting for me, and I was about to give him every reason to walk out. I walked over to the table, and Dylan looked up. Before he could say anything, I launched into the apology I'd been rehearsing in my head for the past 15 minutes. The words coming out in a rush, like, if I said them fast enough, it would somehow make the situation less mortifying. "I'm so sorry I wore my work uniform. I look completely awful. I know I'm super late, and I should have just canceled, but I got stuck with a trauma case, and I couldn't leave. And then I thought about going home to change, but that would have made me even later. And I totally understand if you want to just leave, because this is probably the worst first impression ever, and I'm sorry," I said, without taking a breath. I was already mentally preparing for Dylan to make some excuse about having an early morning or needing to pick up his kid, because that's what every other guy had done when my job got in the way. But Dylan didn't stand up to leave, or check his watch, or give me that tight smile that meant he was annoyed but trying to be polite. Instead, he actually stood up and gently held up his hand like he was stopping traffic. His voice was calm and genuine when he spoke. "Hey, stop. You just spent however many hours saving somebody's life. Sit down. I'll get you a drink. You don't need to apologize for that," Dylan said. His expression was so sincere that I literally froze mid-anxiety spiral because that was not the response I'd been expecting. I stood there blinking at him for a second while my brain tried to process what was happening. Dylan gestured to the seat across from him. "Seriously, sit. You look like you're about to fall over. When's the last time you ate anything?" I sat down more out of shock than agreement and said, I had half a granola bar around 2. Dylan shook his head and walked to the bar to order, leaving me sitting there completely thrown off balance. He came back 2 minutes later with a large glass of water and the margarita, set them both in front of me, and said, "Drink the water first. You're probably dehydrated." The margaritas for after. I just stared at him because, in my experience, guys didn't do this. They didn't care about whether I'd eaten or if I was tired. They cared about whether I was going to be fun and available and not constantly ditching them for work. Dylan slid back into his seat and took a drink of his beer.
So, motorcycle accident. Did they make it?
I found myself nodding. Yeah, he's stable. Broken leg and some road rash, but he'll be okay. We had to run a bunch of scans to make sure there wasn't internal bleeding. Dylan leaned forward like he was actually interested.
That's incredible. I can't even imagine dealing with that kind of pressure.
How long have you been an ER nurse? We fell into conversation, and I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Dylan to check his phone or make a comment about how my job must make dating hard, or ask if I was always this much of a mess. But he just kept asking real questions and listening to my answers like they actually mattered. I learned that he owned a small electrical contracting business, mostly residential work, but some commercial jobs. He built it from the ground up over the past 8 years. After working for someone else taught him everything he didn't want his own company to be. I've got 3 guys who work for me now. We do good work and treat people fair. It's not fancy, but it pays the bills. And I get to be my own boss, Dylan said. There was pride in his voice, but not arrogance. Just the satisfaction of someone who'd worked hard for what they had. When I asked if he had kids, because Jenna had mentioned something about him being a dad, Dylan's whole face softened in this way that made my chest do something weird. Yeah, I've got a daughter, Piper. She's 7. She's pretty much my entire world. I asked about Piper's mom carefully because that could be a sensitive topic, and Dylan didn't flinch, just answered honestly. Her mom Rachel left when Piper was 2. She tried for a while, but being a mom wasn't what she thought it would be, and she couldn't handle it. So she moved back to California, and I've been doing the solo parent thing ever since. It's just me and Piper, and my mom helps out when she can. There was no bitterness in his voice when he said it, just matter-of-fact acceptance of his reality. I appreciated that he didn't trash his ex or make it into some dramatic story. The food came, and we kept talking. Somewhere between the street tacos and the second round of drinks, I realized I'd stopped apologizing and started actually enjoying myself. When I checked my phone and saw it was almost 10 o'clock, I couldn't believe we'd been sitting there for over 2 hours. Dylan noticed me checking the time and said, "You need to get going. I know you probably have an early shift tomorrow." I shook my head. Actually, I'm off this weekend for once. I just can't believe we've been here this long. I thought for sure you'd bail after I showed up looking like this. Dylan looked at me for a second and then said something that hit me harder than I expected. "Kelsey, I get what it's like when your life doesn't fit into neat little boxes. I run my own business and raise a kid by myself. Nothing about my schedule is normal either, and I respect the hell out of what you do. You don't need to apologize for being dedicated to your job."
We walked out to the parking lot around 10:30 and stood by my car, and I felt this weird nervousness that had nothing to do with anxiety and everything to do with not wanting this to end. "I had a really good time tonight, even though I showed up late and probably smelled like a hospital," I said, and Dylan laughed. "You smelled fine, and I had a great time too. Can I text you? Maybe we could do this again, when you're not coming straight from saving lives." I nodded, probably too enthusiastically. "Yeah, I'd really like that." When Dylan leaned in to hug me goodbye, it felt natural and warm, and like maybe this could actually be something. I drove home with my windows down, even though it was chilly, because I needed the air to process what had just happened. I kept replaying Dylan saying, "You don't need to apologize for that," because nobody had ever said that to me before. Every other guy I dated had made me feel guilty for my schedule,
or acted like my job was an inconvenience they had to work around. I texted Jenna when I got home. Okay, you were right. He's great. Thank you for not giving up on me. Jenna wrote back immediately. Finally, I told you Dylan was different. He gets it, because his life is complicated too. Now don't screw this up by overthinking it. I fell asleep that night, still in my scrubs, because I was too exhausted to shower. For the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I didn't have to choose between my career and having someone who actually understood me. 3 weeks into dating, Dylan and I had already apologized approximately 47 times for various things that he kept telling me weren't actually problems. I was starting to realize that my chronic need to say sorry for basically existing was becoming its own issue. But I genuinely didn't know how to stop doing it.
Our second date had been at a movie, and I'd fallen asleep 20 minutes in because I'd worked a double shift the day before. When Dylan gently woke me up during the credits, I'd immediately started apologizing while he just laughed and said, "You needed the sleep more than you needed to see the ending. It's fine." Our third date I'd had to cancel 2 hours before because the hospital called me in to cover for someone who'd gotten food poisoning. I'd sent Dylan a text that was basically a novel of apologies. He just responded, "Stop saying sorry. We'll reschedule. Go save lives." By week 4, we'd fallen into this comfortable rhythm where Dylan would text me good morning even though he knew I might not respond for hours. I would send him random updates from work like, "Just pulled a Lego out of a kid's nose. It's been that kind of day." And Dylan would respond with equally random updates from job sites like, "Client asked if I could make their chandelier play music. People are wild." We'd grab late dinners when I got off shift. Sometimes I'd still be in scrubs, and Dylan never once commented on it, except to ask if I'd had a rough day. I kept waiting for him to get tired of my unpredictable schedule, but he just kept showing up. The problem was, I had been conditioned by every previous relationship to believe that my job was too much, that I was too much, and no amount of Dylan being patient and understanding could convince my brain to stop bracing for the moment he'd finally had enough. 6 weeks, and Dylan asked if I wanted to meet Piper, and I felt this weird combination of excited and terrified, because meeting someone's kid felt significant in a way that made everything suddenly very real. We'd planned the casual Saturday afternoon at Zilker Park. Nothing formal, just hanging out. I had changed my outfit 3 times that morning before settling on jeans and a t-shirt, because I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard. Piper turned out to be the spunky 7-year-old with her dad's dark hair and a gap-toothed smile, and she looked me up and down when we met and said with zero filter, "Are you Dad's girlfriend?" He said, "You work at a hospital. Do you really see blood and stuff?" I had laughed and knelt down to Piper's level. I am his girlfriend, and yeah, I see blood sometimes, but mostly I just help people feel better when they're sick or hurt. Piper's eyes had gone wide, like I had just revealed I was a superhero. We'd spent the afternoon playing on the playground and getting snow cones. Piper had talked non-stop about school and her best friend Bailey and how she was learning to ride her bike without training wheels. I found myself genuinely enjoying this kid's company in a way I hadn't expected. Dylan watched us together with this soft expression that made my stomach flip. When Piper asked if I had my stethoscope in my car because she wanted to hear her own heartbeat, I actually did, and let Piper listen while explaining how hearts worked. On the drive home, Piper announced from the back seat, "I like her, Dad. She's cool, and she didn't talk to me like I'm a baby."
Dylan had reached over and squeezed my hand.
I'd felt this overwhelming sense of fitting into something I didn't know I'd been missing. But even with things going well, I couldn't shake the apologizing habit. It got worse the more comfortable we got, because now I wasn't just apologizing for work stuff. I was apologizing for everything. I apologized when I couldn't make it to Piper's soccer game because I'd picked up an extra shift. I apologized when I was too tired to go to Dylan's mom's birthday dinner.
I apologized when I fell asleep on his couch during a movie we were watching at his place. Every single time, Dylan would say some version of, "Stop apologizing. You're allowed to be tired. You're allowed to have a demanding job. I'm not going anywhere." I wanted to believe him. But there was this voice in my head that sounded a lot like my ex-boyfriend Ryan that kept whispering, "He's just being nice now. Eventually, he'll snap and tell you, you're too much work." 3 months into our relationship, I got called into my nurse manager's office on a Tuesday morning. I'd spent the walk down the hallway trying to figure out what I'd done wrong, because getting called to management usually wasn't a good thing. But when I sat down, my manager, Patricia, had smiled and said, "Kelsey, I want to offer you the charge nurse position on the evening shift. You've been here 5 years. You're one of our strongest nurses, and the team respects you. I think you'd be perfect for the leadership role." I had sat there stunned, because this was huge. Charge nurse meant more responsibility and better pay, and the kind of career advancement I'd been hoping for. But it also meant even more hours and even less predictability. The immediate thought that crashed through my excitement was, Dylan's going to leave. I'd asked Patricia for 24 hours to think about it, even though I already knew I wanted to say yes. On the drive home, my brain went to a place I'd been trying not to think about for months. Back to 2 years ago, when I'd been dating Ryan. He'd started making comments about my schedule. Ryan had been in finance, worked normal 9 to 5 hours, and after about 6 months of dating, he'd started asking when I was going to look for a job with better work-life balance, suggesting I could do office nursing or maybe go back to school for something that didn't require nights and weekends. I had tried to explain that I loved emergency medicine, that it was my calling, not just a job. Ryan had gotten increasingly frustrated until one night he'd actually said, "You're never going to have a normal life if you keep doing this. You'll always be alone, because nobody wants to date someone who's never available." That fight had ended with me choosing my career and Ryan walking out. He'd sent me a text a week later that said, "I hope it's worth it, being married to your job." I had cried for 3 days before deciding he was probably right, that maybe I was meant to be alone because my priorities were different. I dated casually after that, but never let anyone get close, because I didn't want to go through that rejection again. I didn't want to hear another person tell me I needed to change who I was fundamentally to deserve love. And now, here was Dylan, this incredible guy who'd been nothing but patient and supportive. I was about to take a job that would make me even less available. I couldn't shake the certainty that this would be the thing that finally made him realize I was too much trouble. I sat on that anxiety for 2 days before I texted Dylan and asked if we could meet for coffee. When he showed up at our usual spot on Thursday afternoon, I could tell he knew something was up by the way I couldn't quite meet his eyes. We ordered our drinks and sat down at a corner table, and Dylan said, "What's going on, Kels? You've been weird since Tuesday." I took a breath and just said it. My manager offered me a promotion to charge nurse. It's more money and it's what I've been working toward, but it's also going to mean more hours and more responsibility and even less free time than I have now. I watched Dylan's face, expecting to see frustration or resignation, but before he could respond, I kept talking, the words tumbling out in a rush, fueled by panic and old wounds. "I'm taking the job, Dylan. I have to. It's my career, and it's important to me. But I know what this means, and I'm not going to make you sit through me becoming even more unavailable than I already am. You and Piper deserve someone who can actually show up and be present, and not constantly cancel plans or fall asleep or be too exhausted to function," I said, and my voice was shaking. "I'm sorry, I really am, but this isn't fair to you, and I think we should end this now, before it gets worse and Piper gets more attached and everyone gets hurt."
I watched Dylan's expression shift from confused to shocked to something that looked like hurt. He sat down his coffee cup slowly, like he was trying to process what I just said. "Wait, you're breaking up with me?" Dylan's voice came out rough. "Kelsey, I haven't even said anything yet. You just told me about a promotion, and then immediately decided I can't handle it. Did I do something to make you think I'd react badly to this?" I felt tears burning behind my eyes. "No, you've been amazing. That's the problem. You've been so patient and understanding, and I keep waiting for you to hit your limit, and I can't watch you slowly start to resent me for choosing my job. I've been through that before, and I can't do it again." Dylan reached for my hand, but I pulled back.
I'm sorry, Dylan. This is for the best. You'll find someone who can give you what you need. Someone who's not constantly apologizing for existing. I stood up before he could argue, grabbed my bag, and walked out of the coffee shop with my vision blurry from tears. I didn't look back, because if I did, I'd lose my nerve. I drove home and cried in my car for 20 minutes before going inside. I ignored the 3 texts from Dylan asking me to please just talk to him, because I knew if I responded, I'd cave. And this was the right thing to do, even though it felt like my chest was being crushed. I texted Patricia that night and accepted the charge nurse position. When my coworker Jenna asked me Monday morning how Dylan had reacted to the promotion news, I had to tell her we'd broken up. Jenna had looked at me like I'd lost my mind.
"You broke up with him? Kelsey, that man is crazy about you. What happened?" I just shook my head. "He deserves better than someone who's going to be working 60-hour weeks. It was the right call." But saying it out loud didn't make it feel any more true.
2 weeks without Dylan felt like the longest stretch of time I had experienced in years. And I'd thrown myself into my new charge nurse position with the kind of intensity that made my coworkers ask if I was okay. Because working 60-hour weeks and volunteering for every extra shift wasn't normal, even by ER nurse standards. I told myself I was just being dedicated to my new role, that this was what advancement looked like.
But the truth was, I was using work to avoid thinking about how much I missed Dylan's good morning texts, and his patient smile, and the way Piper had started calling me Nurse Kels, like it was the coolest title in the world. Jenna had stopped asking about the breakup after I snapped at her on day 5, but my coworker still gave me these looks that clearly said, "You're making a massive mistake, and you know it." And I just kept my head down and focused on patient charts.
What I didn't know was that Dylan had spent those same 2 weeks trying to respect my decision, while also feeling completely blindsided by the fact that I'd broken up with him before he'd even gotten a chance to respond to my promotion news. Every single night, Piper asked where I was and why I didn't come over anymore. Dylan had tried to explain it in terms a 7-year-old would understand. Something about how, sometimes, grown-ups have to make hard choices about their jobs and their time. But Piper had looked at him with those sharp kid eyes that saw right through adult nonsense and said, "Dad, did you mess up? Because you always tell me to use my words, and it sounds like maybe nobody used their words here." That had hit Dylan harder than he wanted to admit, because Piper was right. I had made assumptions about how he'd react and never gave him the chance to actually tell me how he felt. Dylan talked to his mom about it on a Saturday morning when she came over to watch Piper. His mom, Linda, had listened to the whole story before saying, "So, let me get this straight. She got a promotion that she's been working toward for years, and instead of celebrating with you, she decided you'd eventually resent her, so she just ended it preemptively?" Dylan nodded, and his mom shook her head. "That girl's been hurt before. I can see it all over her. Someone made her believe that her ambition was a problem instead of something to be proud of. You need to tell her she was wrong about you."
Dylan had said, "I made it pretty clear I don't want to hear from him," but his mom had given him that look she'd perfected over 35 years of parenting. "She's scared, Dylan. Scared people don't always make good decisions, but that doesn't mean you give up on them." On a Wednesday night at the end of week 2, Dylan did something that was either incredibly romantic or borderline stalking, depending on how you looked at it.
He texted Jenna, the coworker who'd set us up in the first place, and asked when my shift ended. Jenna had responded immediately with, "Finally, she gets off at 11 o'clock tonight. She parks in the south lot. Go get her." Dylan had recruited his mom to stay late with Piper and driven to the hospital with absolutely no plan, except that he needed me to actually hear what he'd been trying to say 2 weeks ago. He parked near the employee exit at 10:45 and waited.
When I walked out at 11:15, steering my scrubs with my bag slung over my shoulder, looking exhausted, Dylan got out of his truck and called my name. I stopped walking and turned around. Even from 20 feet away, Dylan could see my face cycle through surprise and confusion and something that looked like hope before settling unguarded. "Dylan, what are you doing here? Is Piper okay?" Dylan walked toward me and stopped a respectful distance away. "She's fine, and she's with my mom. I needed to talk to you, and you weren't answering my texts, so I figured I'd come to you. Is that okay?" I shifted my bag on my shoulder and looked like I was debating between running to my car and staying. But finally, I nodded. "Okay, talk." My voice came out more defensive than Dylan thought I probably meant to. "You broke up with me before I could even say congratulations," Dylan said. He kept his voice level, even though he'd been carrying this frustration for 2 weeks. "You told me about the promotion, and then immediately decided I couldn't handle it. And you didn't give me a single chance to tell you how I actually felt about it. You just made assumptions based on whatever that last guy did to you and checked out before I could prove you wrong." My jaw tightened and I looked away. "I was saving you the trouble, Dylan. I know how this goes. Eventually, you would have gotten tired of me never being available, and you would have started making comments about my schedule, and we would have ended up here anyway. I just skipped the part where we both waste more time." Dylan took a step closer, and his voice got softer. "Do you though? Do you actually know how this goes with me? Because I was going to tell you. I'm proud of you. That you earned that promotion. Because you're an incredible nurse and a natural leader. I was going to ask if you wanted to celebrate, and I was going to tell you that Piper had already started making you a congratulations card because she was so excited that you were getting recognized for being good at your job." My eyes filled with tears, and I pressed my lips together like I was trying to hold it together. And Dylan kept going because he needed me to hear all of it. "I fell in love with you in Scrubs, Kelsey, exhausted and apologizing for being late. I didn't fall for some imaginary version of you with a 9-to-5 job and weekends off. I fell for the woman who saves lives and runs on 4 hours of sleep and still shows up." "Dylan, I can't." My voice cracked and the tears started falling. "I can't be what you need. I'm always going to be late and tired and distracted by work. I'm always going to have to cancel plans and miss things and choose the ER over everything else sometimes. And I've spent my entire adult life apologizing for taking up space and being too much. And I can't do that with you. I can't watch you slowly start to resent me for being who I am." Dylan closed the distance between us and gently took my hands. "Then stop. Stop apologizing. Stop waiting for me to turn into someone I'm not. I'm not Ryan or whoever else made you feel like you had to choose between your career and being loved. I choose you, Kelsey. All of you. The 60-hour weeks and the scrubs and the falling asleep during movies. I don't want you to be less. I want you exactly as you are. I completely broke down at that. The kind of crying that comes from years of holding everything in. And Dylan pulled me into a hug while I sobbed into his shoulder in the hospital parking lot at 11:30 on a Wednesday night. I'm so tired of being too much, I said through tears. I'm tired of feeling like I have to apologize for wanting both a career and a relationship. I'm tired of shrinking myself to make other people comfortable. Dylan held me tighter. Then don't. Be as big as you want to be. Take up all the space you need. I'm not asking you to be smaller. I'm asking you to let me stand beside you while you're out here being amazing. We stood there for a long time until my breathing evened out and I pulled back enough to look at him. I really messed this up, didn't I?
Dylan smiled. Yeah, a little bit. But we can fix it if you're willing to actually talk to me instead of making decisions for both of us. 4 months later, I was running late to Dylan's place after a particularly brutal shift. I'd texted him, "Still in scrubs, haven't showered, bringing Thai food as an apology." Dylan had written back, "Stop apologizing, just get here safe." I pulled up at 7:30 and grabbed the takeout bags. Before I could even knock, Piper threw open the door and shouted, "Kelsey, you're in your uniform. Did you save people today?" I grinned at the kid, who'd somehow become one of my favorite humans. "I did, Bug. Helped a guy who broke his ankle skateboarding and a lady who had a bad allergic reaction. It was a whole thing." Piper grabbed my hand and pulled me inside. "That's so cool. I told my class, you're basically a superhero." And my friend Emma said her mom's a nurse too. But I said, mine's better. Dylan appeared from the kitchen and kissed me hello, and I leaned into him for a second, just breathing him in. "You still apologizing for the scrubs?" he asked, and I shook my head. "Not anymore. You've trained me out of that one finally." We ate dinner as a weird little family unit that didn't look like anything I had imagined for myself, but felt more right than anything ever had. When Piper was in bed and we were cleaning up the kitchen, Dylan said, "My mom asked again when we're moving in together. I told her we're taking it at your pace, but she's relentless." I dried a plate and thought about it. Maybe after my 6-month review, I want to make sure I've got the charge nurse thing down before I add another big change. Is that okay? Dylan pulled me close. That's perfect. There's no rush. We've got time. Sometimes, the right person doesn't need you polished and perfect. They love you exhausted and real, and still wearing your work clothes because that's who you actually are. I had spent so many years thinking I had to choose between my career and being loved, that I'd almost missed the person who was trying to tell me I never had to choose at all. Dylan didn't want me to apologize for my ambition or shrink myself to fit into his life. He wanted to build a life big enough for both of us to be exactly who we were.